And joining us now to weigh in on the legality of executive action is famed attorney and former Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, also the famed author as well. Thanks for joining us, Professor.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
All right, that new book is called Terror Tunnels, the case for Israel's just war against Hamas. Now, we're looking at these executive actions. We've heard Republicans in Congress talk about what they would do in response, some sort of legal action inside Congress. But what's your take on the legality, since the president does not seem shy about at least throwing out these threats?
Well, the constitutional situation is absolutely clear. Nobody knows. That's the answer. Nobody knows. If you look back at the way the Constitution was written, it clearly intended to divide authority between the executive and the legislative branches, with the judiciary being the ultimate decider. So, you hear the myth that the president is entitled to make foreign policy. Total nonsense. Treaties, for example, have to be confirmed by two-thirds of the Senate. Ambassadors have to be confirmed by a majority of the Senate. So it's divided authority. And the courts have never been very clear as to how much authority the president has over issues like immigration. And by the way, this is not a Democrat-Republican issue. From the time of Thomas Jefferson, who ran for president on the theory of a limited president and then had the Louisiana Purchase without any authorization from Congress, we see executives grabbing more and more and more power. The most recent President Bush had these signing statements, which were a way to grab executive power. So nobody knows ultimately how a lawsuit would come out if the president took action on his own, Congress filed a lawsuit, and it went up to the United States Supreme Court. Nobody knows.
It does seem like the president, though, is having, maybe this isn't the right way to characterize this, but having a little fun with Republicans in Congress by continuing to threaten this, yet not really doing a lot of action.
Well, what the president is basically saying is, look, I got elected president. And what Congress is saying is, yeah, but that was 2 years ago. Look at the most recent election. We now have the mandate. The president is threatening, no question. By the way, Governor Perry was indicted in Texas for threatening to use a veto. So, you talk about how we criminalize our policy differences. Of course, nobody's suggesting that the president is doing anything wrong. He's not. He's entitled to threaten, and he's entitled to threaten vetoes, and he would veto if Congress passed any laws inconsistent with his policy. And I think we see two areas where this is coming up. One is amnesty and the whole immigration issue. The other, far, far more important internationally, is whether the president really has authority to sign a very, very bad deal with Iran over its nuclear program, whether that constitutes a treaty that requires senatorial confirmation, whether Congress could continue to impose sanctions, even if the president promises Iran that sanctions would be reduced, whether they can pass new sanctions, the president can then veto the new sanctions, whether the veto would be overruled. Look, when our Constitution was enacted, nobody said it would be a mechanism for efficiency. It's not supposed to be. The checks and balances are supposed to make it hard for presidents and for Congress to act unilaterally. What we expect is action together. Now, that's become very difficult under gridlock, so one understands why the president wants to take such action unilaterally.
Nobody's holding their breath for that type of cooperation just quite yet, but when we do want to talk, of course, about this pending treaty, whatever it may be, with Iran and the United States over the nuclear power issue. But I want to go back to this issue, too, because how much of this, Alan, do you just think, and you look at this from a constitutional standpoint, how much of this is just the new Republican leadership and the executive office just pounding their chests, feeling each other out as they get down?
I think there's a lot of that going on, and I think there's a game of chicken going on, who will blink first. But the problem is they're both operating in the context of the unknown. Nobody knows how the courts will decide these cases. There is a case now pending in front of the Supreme Court about proper allocation of power in foreign policy between President and Congress. That probably won't get decided until the new year, and that may give some guidance on this very complicated issue.
And also, we're coming off that recent case from the Supreme Court where they slapped down the president's appointees to the Labor Relations Board, another check on the president's power. So we've seen this pendulum shift before, shifting towards the White House, then back to Congress, of course, with the Supreme Court, the one actually.
Yeah, and of course, one of the justices of the Supreme Court, my friend and former boss, Elena Kagan, made her academic reputation on articles concerning executive authority. So she is the court's expert on the power of the executive, because she was in the White House counsel's office during the Clinton administration.
And an Obama appointee. And we'll get back to this. We'll have more coming up with Alan Dershowitz. We're going to talk about Iran and the nuclear talks currently ongoing in Oman. We'll be back with more here on America's Forum right after this.